Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday service of Now Creations. Just want you to know what a joy it is just to be with you and to always remind you that the most important thing of life is the presence you have within yourself. It's the God Spirit at the very center of your soul. May you come to know that presence each day and allow it to be your guide in life. Two comments before we begin today. First of all, I'd like to invite you to our new book study on Wednesday evening and Thursday morning, an Ascension Handbook by Tony Stubbs. It's a wonderful book, be very, very helpful for your growth. Please join us Wednesday evening from 7 to 8:30 or Thursday morning from 10 to 11:30. And then also, if you're able to do so, please join us this evening for What is Light Body from 7 to 8:30. Let's begin. My dear friends, what an ongoing joy it is for me to greet you in our weekly teachings. While each session is joyful, what is most inspiring is the way that so many of you are responding to the teachings. It is quite exciting for me to see so many of you excited. Excited because you're allowing the God Spirit to be directive. It's becoming your spirit. And also to allow the God Spirit to be the way that you are choosing to respond to everyday life. I have been especially moved by your acceptance of our future trends in spiritual awareness. You clearly are aware of the importance of the first and foundational trend, that is, a greater experience of and an appreciation of your own personal spiritual practices. I can't emphasize this enough. Your spiritual practices are the substance of your future. Just need to say that again. Your spiritual practices are the substance of your future. And then secondly, how you are connecting your spirituality with improvements in your physical well-being. You simply seem to feel better more and more of the time. In today's teaching, we will continue our third future trend, namely progressing in oneness and love. In last Sunday's teaching, we focused on the basis of our oneness and love, namely that all human beings are of the family of God, and that our goal of spiritual poise is to meet the situation of our lives in this oneness and love. Today, we will conclude the teaching with the third and fourth aspects of oneness and love. Let's begin. While the first and second aspects of oneness and love focus on the God Spirit and maintaining spiritual poise with others, the third and fourth aspects focus more on you. And I trust that you will find these teachings insightful and helpful. The third aspect of oneness and love. I would like to introduce this third aspect with something that you know, that then adds something that perhaps maybe you do not know, and add some strong teachings in the process. First, what you know. I think that most of you by now have come to the conclusion that you are creating the reality of your life. We have focused again and again on this basic teaching, that no one is forcing you to make your choices. You are free to make the choices of your life. However, what we fail to realize is that while we are free to make our choices, we are not free for our consequences. Although we're free for choices, we are not free for consequences. In other words, you must live with the consequences of your choices. Now, let me support this teaching with a strong principle that we introduced in last Sunday's teaching, namely, that in order for a person in order for a person to have a good quality in their actions, that action must feel right. It must not only make sense to them, but it must feel right as well. It is precisely at this point where we are challenged with oneness and love. While you can accept in your mind that we are all one, it's quite another thing to feel that you are one with others. This is precisely where the consequences of your choices come into play. You simply don't feel right. You simply don't feel right when you still are at odds with another. You cannot deny these feelings. You cannot deny the consequences in your heart once your choices have been made. You realize that something has to change if you're going to advance spiritually. This is a pivotal area for you. Sincerely accepting everyone in the embrace of love and oneness, when at times perhaps you have not felt that energy. Now, last week we focused on what you had to do for others to allow your soul to feel right. Today, I want to focus on you, what you might need to do to allow your soul to embrace others. Might I suggest these 3 supports for you? These supports are for you to be able to deal more honestly with the consequences of your choices in accepting others. First, this uneasiness in your soul is a behavioral issue. In a nutshell, it clearly indicates that there is a place in you that is yet to be reconciled with the God Spirit, namely, that each person, every person, is a child of God. It's important for you to sit with this issue. It does you no good to sugarcoat it. It's simply going to resurface again. Yes, it is time to come to grips with this spiritual behavioral issue of accepting each human being as a part of your family. Let me suggest 2 helpful ways in doing so. The first one is a very inspirational phrase. It simply states that we enter heaven 2 by 2. Let me repeat this. We enter heaven 2 by 2. The obvious meaning of the teaching is that if you are going to picture yourself with another, you have to be hand in hand if you anticipate entering heaven with that person. But also it's very important, obviously, not just to enter heaven with that person in your mind, but to be hand in hand with that person in your life right here, right now. Clearly realizing that if the other whose hand you are holding makes you feel uncomfortable, clearly realizing that if the person's hand that you are holding makes you feel uncomfortable, this is a spiritual behavioral issue. So let's look at the second very powerful example of the teachings of Jesus in these 2 ways. Each of them, I suggest, is what we need to hear anew to open our hearts a little bit more in our love for others. These are wonderful teachings. The first one concerns the occasion that Jesus was asked by one of his disciples, Lord, what commandments should we be following in life? And Jesus said, well, there's only 2. 2 commandments. You know them. The first one, that you should love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. Number one. And then listen to the words he says before he gives that second commandment. The words he said in between are these, and the second is like the first, and the second is like the first, and that is that you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That you should love your neighbor, your family member, your friends, with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. This is very, very powerful. This obviously was not always the case in Jesus' day, as evidenced in the teaching on the Good Samaritan, where people, in a sense, very much didn't even love each other, let alone other people. It's also evidence, I think, realistically, in our present life situations, in which we still have so many wars, but not just nation against nation, but also wars between people, even at times wars in your own family, and of course, perhaps maybe wars within your own self. This is where we have made a lot of growth. This sense of estrangement from our neighbor has begun to lessen, and to be lessening even more as we truly learn to love God with our whole mind, heart, soul, and strength. As we do that, our love for our neighbor will again begin to soften even more so that we might embrace them. It's as simple as learning to love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. Now listen closely. This is what we have done in meditation. In meditation, we're beginning to understand that as we spend more time to connect with our God Spirit, we then feel that love of God within us. And as we feel that love of God within us, it is really helping us to embrace our neighbors. Do you see where the second commandment relies on the first? As you love God in your meditation, you will love your neighbor better as well. Yet there is a second teaching of Jesus that stands out very well for us as well. It's just such a wonderful, wonderful teaching, very powerful, just like the twofold commandment. The second teaching is a theme that runs throughout the wonderful book, A Course in Miracles. And that teaching is that we are one family of God. And it is true, that in order to enter heaven, we do not enter heaven by ourselves, but we always enter heaven 2 by 2 with our brothers and sisters. Now, the most compelling presentation of this theme in A Course in Miracles is Jesus' teaching on the meaning of the crucifixion. His teaching is not that he died to save anyone, because none of us have ever been lost from the Father's love, but rather the meaning of the crucifixion is to help us to understand that no one is outside of the family of God. Even those who are jeering at you and putting you to death. And then he says, I have given you an extreme example, and it is an extreme example, being put to death in such a cruel manner to teach you one truth. We enter heaven 2 by 2 with our brothers and our sisters. This teaching demands time and attention to absorb. Please do so over this next week. Being one family of God, despite seemingly different levels of consciousness, lies at the heart of our progression in oneness and love. There is one other point to consider in our relationships to others, especially in dealing with people who have seemingly different levels of consciousness. This is a point that you will have to decide. I will present it to you, but you're the one that needs to make the decision. The point concerns setting boundaries with others. This point of setting boundaries has two possibilities, again, which you will have to decide. The first possibility is that it can be very, very helpful. It can be very helpful to set boundaries because certain relationships can be very toxic, and the person involved needs to set a boundary as to what is or is not acceptable from the other. I totally agree with this viewpoint, and I encourage you to do so where you see fit. There is another possibility, however. The other side of the coin, the second viewpoint, is that you are now ready to meet this new challenge that the other person is presenting to you, that you are now ready to advance in your understanding of yourself and in your understanding of the other. So sometimes it is important not to set boundaries too quickly, because at this time, you are now ready to progress in your spiritual understanding. Again, this is up for you to decide. At this point in today's teaching, it is important for us to bring up an old teaching concerning relationships with others, especially inasmuch as it will serve as a bridge to our fourth aspect of proceeding in oneness and love. This old teaching has an interesting word attached to it, as well as an interesting concept. The interesting word is one that was introduced by Carolyn Mace, the wonderful spiritual intuitive. The term that she coined, and I think it's a good one, is woundology. Woundology, a study of the wounds that we have experienced playing the game of separation. Of course, the wounds being much more of an emotional, mental, and spiritual nature than just physical wounds. The same idea was presented in the insightful book of Henri Nouwen entitled The Wounded Healer. The Wounded Healer. It clearly presents the idea that each one of us has had our own spiritual, mental, and emotional scars as we have moved through the battleground of life. While the term woundology and wounded healer have a certain truth to them, I would like to suggest that it's now time for us to move beyond the past. It's time to move beyond what our past has been. It's time to move beyond licking our wounds because we are not presently who we were. I need to say this again. It's time to move beyond licking our wounds because presently we are not who we were. We have changed our identity. We have changed our identity from a wounded personality self into a very powerful soul spirit, ready, willing, and able to usher in the kingdom of God. This is our fourth and final aspect of oneness and love. To present this fourth aspect of oneness and love, to usher in the kingdom of God, let me change a question we often ask into a statement, using the same words, but simply exchanging two of the words. The old question we might ask ourselves is, what are you doing for others? Let's switch the words are and you and put the old question into a bold, creative statement. Let's change the question, what are you doing for others? Into this bold statement, what you are doing for others. What you are doing for others. This is more our style. What we are doing for others. We're bringing oneness and love into the earth expression. And may I suggest in these three ways. The first is that you are doing exactly what Barbara Marx Hubbard taught in her book entitled Emergence. In this wonderful book, Barbara taught the most important thing we can do for another. The most important thing we can do for another. Are you listening? The most important thing we can do for another is to show up in our awareness in the situations of our lives. It's the most important thing. I believe that in now creations, we are doing precisely this. We are showing up in the light and spirit of God. Let's be clear. We've worked hard in showing up, of bringing the light of God into expression. And each of us is continuing to advance in our people skills so that we might do the appropriate thing in our life situations. As we are so living, we are doing the second and the third aspects of bringing oneness and love to the earth. Here's the second one. As we have lifted ourselves to our highest ideals, as we have lifted ourselves to our highest ideals, we are now inspiring others to elevate their ideals. This is exciting. We are becoming vital forces for goodness and love. We are earnest in our desires, and this sincerity that we are presenting is being clearly understood by others. For years, I have had a very favorite phrase, a very favorite saying that I felt would be the ultimate compliment of life. The saying is, you introduced me to my mind and left me wanting you and your kind. You introduced me to my mind and left me wanting you and your kind. I believe that this is what Jesus and all of the great avatars have done. They have introduced the minds of others to the mind of God. I think this is precisely what we are doing. We are introducing people to their minds by our loving examples, introducing them to the mind of God. The third point of what we are doing, please consider this point deeply. You realize that there are no insignificant encounters with others because you realize that there are no insignificant people. you realize that there are no insignificant encounters with others because there are no insignificant people. It has taken a while to understand this, but now we have. A Course in Miracles calls each of our encounters a holy instant. A holy instant. At any given moment, at this instant, we have the golden opportunity of welcoming our family members into the light of God. This is the way we now see life. Each moment is a holy instant of bringing heaven to earth with one of our family members. As we understand this more and more, our holy instants are adding up, eventually reaching our goal. Only love, right here, right now. Yes, this is what we are doing. The ambitious joy of bringing heaven to earth. In conclusion, it has been a great joy to bring to you this extended teaching of oneness and love. It is indeed what we are doing for others, but most of all, what we are doing for ourselves. We are advancing. We are moving forward. Next week, I will present the last of our 4 future trends. I think you'll find it quite exciting. But for now, focus on today's teaching. May it thrill you. May you become excited by it, to be a wonderful, loving member of the family of God, uniting each other in oneness and love. Let me now take you into meditation, and what a joy it is to do so. It's quite a phrase, isn't it? We enter heaven 2 by 2. We enter heaven 2 by 2. It does make you think of that little connecting phrase between the first commandment and the second commandment that Jesus spoke when he said, the second one is like the first one. This challenges us that we would love our neighbor the way that we love God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. I have often said we can only do the second one if we first do the first one. It's by loving God with our whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, especially in the spiritual practice of meditation, that you have a chance to love your neighbor as yourself. Try starting to love your neighbor, and you'll fail to love God. Try starting to love your neighbor, and you'll fail to love God. That's Jesus's point. You got to start where it starts. And the only way to do that is through meditation. You have to move into your oneness and understand that each of us is child of God. Do you not see that your choices, especially if you have something against a family member or friend, has consequences? If you're upset with someone, it's not just that you're simply upset with that person, but then you begin to realize that you're distant from the Holy Spirit as well. It doesn't feel right. You can't be upset with your neighbor and love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. But you can love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And as you meditate on the feeling of this oneness, you can then learn to love your neighbor with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. First things first. Until the second commandment becomes like the first one. Let's take this a little further. When Jesus explained these commandments to his disciples, it was probably a cozy setting out in the countryside. Quite another when all of a sudden he found himself hanging on a cross, physically coming to the end of his earthly life, people jeering at him. And then he gave us those incredible words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's pretty much the way it is with people. Just so many people just don't know what they're doing. They are baby souls, regardless of their age. They're baby souls, or at best, young souls. Still caught in the allurements of life. Perhaps that was you at one time, but not anymore. You are ready. You are ready to introduce people to their minds. Because you will find your own mind. You are ready to introduce people to the mind of God because you are now in the mind of God. You do love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. You do. And as a result, you are showing up in the lives of others with the very best within yourself. You realize that there are no insignificant encounters because there's no insignificant people. There is simply one family. And you are showing up. You are showing up happily for others, and happy for yourself. Oh my. You're bringing your best. You are stopping spiritually misbehaving with others. You're done with that. And in its place, only love. Right here, right now. Okay, so we have the rest of the day to live today. So let's put that wonderful, loving smile into our hearts, perhaps one on our faces as well. Just know the truth of these words, the truth of these words. Oneness and love, one family. And notice how it frees you, makes you want to love everyone as indeed it should. May we continue to love God with all of our hearts, minds, soul, and strengths, and in the process, loving our neighbors just in the very same way. This is our ambitious joy. Our ambitious joy. And with that, let me invite you to gently breathe your eyes open. And happily say, I am an eternal being of light and love. Thus, only good can come to me, and only good can come from me. And we are eternal beings of light and love. Thus, only good can come to us, and only good can come from us. Namaste.